Okay, great. So I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Anthony Townsend, who is an internationally recognized expert on the future of cities and urban technology. As a senior research associate at Cornell Tech's Urban Tech Hub, he leads the development of multidisciplinary research collaborations, partnering university researchers with stakeholders in industry, government, and civil society. Anthony is the author of 2 books, Ghost Road Beyond the Driverless Car and Smart Cities, Big Data, Civil Hackers, and the Quest for a New Utopia. So thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm super excited to be here. I was here back in October with my 17-year-old daughter for a campus tour. And it was the first time I had been on the Northeastern campus since 1998, when I was a grad student at MIT and I lived 3 blocks away on Hemingway Street in an overcrowded, dingy, rundown apartment. And I mean, the transformation of this neighborhood and this campus is just amazing. So it's really exciting to see Adriana here and to see everyone and all the work that's being done. So yeah, we'll just plug it in and it should pop right up. So I come to you from another campus that is going through a big transformation, actually from a vacant piece of land that was the site of a former psychiatric hospital into a campus, the first new engineering campus in New York City in 50 years, established at the direction of Mayor Michael Bloomberg as part of the city's effort to diversify the economy after the 2008 financial crisis. The mayor, even though he had made his fortune in the financial sector, saw that the city was too vulnerable. And since our campus's founding 11 years ago, we have been focused on AI. So we got into AI before AI blew up into the thing it is now. And the problem is that the AI boom has really created a new liability for us when it comes to climate. I'm sure everyone is aware of the explosion in demand for AI compute and what that's leading to in terms of data center infrastructure and how it's kind of flipping and breaking all of the curves that we were banking on for the clean energy transition. These are actually McKinsey's charts, so they're kind of like a little bit subdued. If you look at some of the other forecasts, they're even more alarming. But you know, the TLDR is that the AI boom is going to generate just enormous demand for electricity around the world, and that that's creating an enormous liability for our campus and the folks that we serve with our research. So the Urban Tech Hub has been really focused on this, and we have been most focused on climate adaptation and the opportunity that AI presents for adaptation. That's what I'm going to talk about today. But before I do, I want to just jump into a little bit of a broader perspective on like how our best intentions using AI for urban climate action often backfire. I wrote an op-ed last year in City Lab that was looking at one of Google's signature climate AI projects called Project Greenlight. And this was a project that basically is using traffic data from all across the world to optimize traffic signal timing. And the thesis here, which you see in this movie that they made, is that stop and go traffic is inefficient from an internal combustion perspective, and that by optimizing the timing of traffic lights and smoothing the flow of traffic, we can reduce emissions. And that makes sense on paper at first glance if you don't really understand anything about cities or transportation planning or kind of the long-term shift that we're trying to engineer in how people get around cities. And it's a very 20th century, very kind of backwards looking way of thinking about mobility. It's essentially what they call traffic engineering. In transportation planning and good urban design, this is something that is seen as like kind of ancient thinking. faster moving traffic is bad for pedestrians. It basically goes against everything that we have been trying to do in shifting people away from automobiles for the last 20, 30 years. And so, I put this before you as an example of, and you can see the kind of amount of packaging that has gone into telling this story, that this is a great, innovation driven by AI that Google is delivering to the world's cities. And this project is still expanding and still growing. It is one of the jewels of Google's kind of AI climate portfolio, even though it's so fundamentally misconceived. So that's kind of, I think, the default. My working title for this talk was Intelligence for Adaptation, How AI Can Empower Communities Coping with Climate Change. And, at the risk of sounding like a little too doji and gung-ho about the opportunity for transformation there, I kind of flagged myself and thought that I would maybe revise this to a little bit more of a hypothetical. Can AI empower communities coping with climate change? And treat it as my job to convince you that AI isn't all bad for cities, and that I see a lot of opportunities to use the power of AI for climate adaptation. And I think most importantly, I want to throw out the idea that the problem of protecting cities, of defending cities from climate change, can actually be such a powerful force that it could shape demands and innovation for AI going forward, and potentially the whole industry. So the material I want to share with you today is drawn from a horizon scan that I created last year with collaboration from a group in Paris called Urban AI. This is a think tank based in Paris that is focused really on understanding what's coming and what the agenda for AI in urban planning could be. This is, futures research. This is what I've done most of my career, really trying to understand what the long-term trends that are developing in this technology are. It's kind of a hierarchical methodology based on signals, collecting examples of products, services, use cases that are out there in the world today that we think could become more widespread in the future. And then those are synthesized up into trends and forecasts. You're welcome to visit the website and browse through all of this, but I think of this as kind of a knowledge graph of trends. What I'm going to share with you are the three high-level forecasts, and then some of the signals, the evidence that we use to develop those. So the first forecast, there's a bit of kind of lyricism in describing these. So, if it doesn't make sense immediately, I'm going to unpack it for you. But the first forecast we call expansive views. And the shift we see there is from living observatories' diverse data. And what that means is that the way we see risk and resilience in cities is going to undergo a profound transformation. What might that look like? These are some of the signals that we saw out in the world. This is a picture of from a study that was done in Graz in Austria, where a group of researchers used basically bungee corded some infrared thermal imaging devices to drones and flew them over a public square. Now, for any of you who know anything about urban heat islands, almost everything we know and visualize about urban heat islands are simulations. We simply don't have the remote sensing data to precisely map where the hotspots in cities are. And so, they're educated guesses. And what these folks are showing is that we have the tools today to actually go out and measure urban heat islands with great detail. I think this is like a 30-centimeter grid resolution. And then the more exciting part is that they then designed a bunch of interventions, deployed those in the built environment, and then went out and flew this again the next summer and measured the change that they had made. So this is really fine-scaled adaptation. Trees. Okay, trees are probably the single most effective tool that we have for heat mitigation in cities. And as it turns out, computer vision and the kind of segmentation algorithms that are used to isolate individual tree canopies from the larger forests are actually really good now. We had a grad student at Cornell Tech who built a pipeline to do this kind of thing as well. We built a project called Treefolio. There's some amazing work going on at MIT that Sarah Beery is doing with Google, using street view imagery to basically create a digital twin of the urban forest. And then that can be used to model the growth, the health, the performance, the heat mitigating impact of the urban forest over time. And I think this is really a first step towards really deep and pervasive assessment of the natural capital of cities, even in real time, and that creates a platform for kind of rewriting how city dwellers deal with nature. This is one of the diversions we're going to make into stuff that's like a little crazy and hard to understand. But we all know, what LLMs are. We've used chatbots. Well, there's a researcher at the Quran Institute at NYU named Signing Z, who has basically taken chatbots, video games, Google Street View, and mashed them all together. And created what he calls virtual agents in real life. So these are some of the virtual agents that he has created. These are essentially like AI agents that have an identity, they have goals, they have capabilities, they have tools. And then he unleashes them into Google Street View. So, virtual representations of our real city, and the way he says it, their ends are our real cities. So it's all very much communicated in the language of video games. And then they can go and do real work in those virtual cities. So the example he showed at our summit that kind of blew my mind was he unleashed a bunch of these multimodal AI agents to go into Google Street View and count all of the benches in Central Park. So they traverse the routes in Central Park, and they use their computer vision capabilities to identify features. This blew my mind. This is the kind of field work that the kind of assessment and inventorying of assets in cities that is very time consuming. And you can imagine these being unleashed, after a disaster, or to identify housing code violations or whatever it is. The ability to do this work. Of course, it all requires good data on the front end. You have to be able to see the city to do this, but it's really remarkable capability. So, each of these forecasts comes with, I think, like a question mark, an exclamation point, a big kind of strategic issue that it raises. And for expansive views, which is, again, really about expanding the ability to see climate change happening in cities, how is bigger and better data going to be used by whom, and what's it going to be used for? What's the strategies of adaptation that it will enable? Is it about sort of digging in, engineering deeper defenses, building resilience, or is it potentially about retreat or relocation? And if so, is that a choice, or is that going to be imposed on people? The second forecast is what I call optimized insights. So this is really about creating the foresight from that data that we need to start making plans for climate adaptation. And I think what this forecast means really is that thinking machines are going to be part of the teams running and planning future cities. They're going to help us make sense of evidence and predictions that we really cannot ignore. Although, as we're all seeing in the world today, it is actually easy to ignore evidence when you're making policy, unfortunately. So what is this going to look like? These are some of the signals that we're seeing that are kind of informing this perspective. GeoForge, this is one of a whole batch of LLM-powered computer mapping tools, GIS platforms, that basically take the old wonky world of GIS that I grew up in at MIT, which is writing SQL queries and mashing data tables together and dealing with all kinds of really boring formatting stuff, and turning it into something that you can chat with. So you can say, load the building footprint layer, load the floodplain layer. What are the intersections between those two? Show me all the buildings that are at flood risk. This is something that required an expert, a consultant, a massive apparatus to do before, and now is almost trivial. Or it might look like incredibly sophisticated predictive models that allow you to see risk in places that you couldn't see risk before. This is something we're working on actively now. How do you predict who is at risk indoors just by what you can see outdoors and what you know about the construction and the physical characteristics of buildings? And why this is useful is allowing you to really quickly do targeted messaging, particularly for older adults who are going to be less mobile, at greater risk. You know, they may be scared to turn the air conditioner on because they can't afford it. So this is an incredibly difficult problem, but one that has huge potential impact. Another exciting project out of New York City, this is FloodGen. It was created by Beta NYC, a civic tech group there. And what FloodGen does, they selected 8 environmental justice communities in New York City that are at high flood risk, and then use generative AI to develop these really cool interactive visualizations that allow you to see what different levels of flooding will look like in that neighborhood. So to me, this is taking like very wonky, complicated, difficult to understand, difficult to use, to analyze models of climate risk and boiling it down into kind of a single pixel view of what this is going to mean on my block when the water rises. And this has been incredibly effective in raising awareness in some of these communities about the long-term risks of coastal flooding. Where that's moving towards, this is kind of a bit of vaporware, but it's in the pipeline now. So what do you do, right? Like after you become aware of the risk of flooding, well, you need tools to adapt at the individual level. This isn't something, climate adaptation isn't something that government is going to do for us. It's going to require full participation. And so Flood Chat is a tool that's being built by a New York City-based NGO called Unified Ground. It's being funded by Rebuild by Design, which was the region-wide urban design initiative that launched with money from the federal government, from Housing and Urban Development, after Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy in 2011. And this has really been the major resilience program in the region. And basically the idea behind Flood Chat is to take all of the data that we have about flooding, flood mitigation, flood adaptation, make it available through a chatbot, tailored to the needs of New York City's 2.3 million renter households, in multiple languages, in conversational format. And so this is the the climate resilience, the flood resilience hotline. We'll see. I think it's going to be a tough design problem, but it's an interesting opportunity. Moving from the world of kind of text and images to the physical world, one of the things I'm most intrigued by right now that's going on in the AI space is foundation models that are being trained not on like web data, text and images, but trained on IoT data, trained on sensor data, readings of the physical world. This is a image of a product from a company called Archetype AI out in California. And what they're doing is they're using self-supervised learning to train models on like accelerometer data. So what they're showing here is a model that has basically learned, it has taught itself from the data what shaking is. And so it is discovering things about the physical world in the same way that large language models discover things about the structure of language by inspecting the data at scale. This has very obvious use cases that now, your package isn't just sending you a set of 3D coordinates about where it is in space and how fast it's accelerating. It can send you like, hey, I've been shaken too much, I might be broken. Or someone just dropped me, we should do something about that. This capability and this class of models, I think, are the thing that are going to really help these technologies leap off the screen into the real world and start to have fundamental impacts on how we organize our cities. This is a paper that just came out last week from a research group at Apple. It's a tool called GigaFlow, a simulation platform called GigaFlow. And basically what they showed with GigaFlow is that by creating AI agents and engaging them in self-play, where they're basically, playing video games inside the simulated environments that they're designed to operate in this case, the road network, that they can quickly learn the same policies and rules that companies like Waymo and Tesla have spent a decade developing for their self-driving algorithms. And so, the upshot of this is that we now have a pretty good roadmap for how to accelerate the pace of learning for AI about the physical world. And this is a signal that the kinds of rapidly expanding capabilities we're seeing in the language and image and video space for generative AI will quickly start to fold over into the world of automated vehicles and robotics. And yes, terrifying, but also a power that we can harness for good. This one's a little bit more subtle, but also kind of mind-blowing. So this is a company in Berkeley that is tapping sort of the approach that we're seeing in a lot of scientific fields now of using generative AI, large language models, to read through vast stockpiles of research literature and extract new insights and incorporate those new insights into our existing methods and technologies. So this is a household location choice. This company they developed household location choice models, basically trying to understand why people move, where they move, what are the factors that drive that. This is an area of ongoing research. And so they basically developed some tools to constantly read the new papers that are being published in this field. And I incorporate the new findings into the model that they are using. So this is essentially like a model of economic behavior in a city that updates itself based on the latest research findings. So you can imagine in the climate space, this model could constantly be reading the behavioral economics literature on how people respond to climate risk or information about climate risk. Do they move away from risky areas? Do they not? And then incorporating that into its inner workings. There's a lot of tools now that are being built to develop these insights about risk. This is Climate IQ. This is a Google-funded effort at the Urban Systems Lab at the New School in New York City. And essentially what they're doing is pushing together new data, remote sense data about flooding, about heat, along with physics-based models to explain, at a very fine resolution, like where that risk is most intense, and pulling it together in a dashboard that will be delivered to basically any city government around the planet. And this is a set of capabilities that today, really required like a department, a whole team, and custom data and custom tooling to do. And this will allow cities in the global south to kind of level up to the level of understanding and preparedness that we see in other places. So, the question mark, the exclamation mark for this this forecast. I think these insights delivered from AI are going to be very powerful. They're going to be they'll have a lot of value, but they will challenge local knowledge. And so, this is kind of the give and take that happens anytime you introduce computer-based or automated decision-making into an organization, is how do you make sure that that information, that process is transparent, it's accountable, and most important, that it's aligned with what the community actually needs and isn't imposing some new system of measurement value that that is not aligned. The third and final forecast in our horizon scan is what I call amplified actions. And we describe that as a shift from persistent processes giving rise to self-managing adaptations. Again, a little bit of a lyrical leap there. And I mean, what that means is really humanity is aging since the pandemic, spreading out. That's actually a long-term trend, not just since the pandemic. And we're feeling the heat. And this forecast is basically saying heavy automation is going to be the thing that kind of comes to the rescue. Again, what does this look like on the ground? Decision support systems like FortiGuard. This is actually a startup that grew out of Masdar, which is one of the world's sort of most notable planned smart cities in the desert in Abu Dhabi. Didn't really succeed as a real estate project, but has given rise to a bunch of interesting technology companies. And FortiGuard is also a heat island mapping tool, but incorporates a number of processes to automatically generate mitigation plans and then simulate them, and then deliver that as essentially a punch list to heat officers. And so you can imagine cities relying on sophisticated systems to help them not just assess the risk, but to actually plan the interventions and evaluate them over time. It's also going to look like tools for lay people to generate alternative urban scenarios. Urbanist AI is actually out of Estonia, and they work with cities around the world to use image generation tools to drive urban design processes that are really participatory and really detailed. And again, this is a kind of capability that, today requires experts, requires lots of like custom computation, a lot of know-how. And what this is going to do is allow more people to express clearer, more compelling visions of what they think their cities should look like. This is a project that we sponsored at Cornell Tech to help the city think about updating a really ancient part of its environmental impact review process, traffic impact studies. So this is one of like 37 chapters that you have to complete if you want to build something big in New York City. And I think of this as sort of the administration of adaptation, right? Like we might have all the resources in the world, all of the political consensus that we need to build flood barriers or green infrastructure or whatever the solution is, but we can't do the paperwork in time to keep up with the threat. And this is something that our chief climate officer, Rit Agrawal in New York City, is basically obsessed with. What he says is, I have 30 years of construction to do and I have 10 years to do it. How do I get through that? So we convened a workshop of all of the providers of traffic data in the marketplace and New York City DOT and said, how do we get you guys to believe that this data is good enough for developers to use it to convince you that the traffic impact of their project is manageable? And it turns out it's a lot harder than it looks. There are shortcomings in the data, and there are changes that need to be made to rules. It may look like platforms for, again, the administration of adaptation, for simply writing better grants. So Streamline Climate is a company based in Palo Alto that uses generative AI, large language models, to help climate tech startups. Well, this is last year. They're pivoting now. But the original business model was to help climate tech startups write clean energy grant proposals and get money from the federal government so that they could go do work in cities. And it's a really, for all of you who have ever written grants, this stuff is awesome. I mean, it is. You can pull up all the reference documents. If there's a term in the RFP that you don't understand, you click on it and it will pull up the reference documents and explain it. This is the future of grant writing, and it's being driven by folks who want to do climate work. As we start to look further out in this automated adaptation space, things get pretty sci-fi. Singapore's H3 Dynamics, they are basically selling a drone in a box solution that you put on the top of your high-rise building. Each day, the drones launch out, they survey the entire facade of the building, and they look for defects, whether it's peeling paint, water stains, cracks, corrosion, and then automatically generate work orders for maintenance crews to go out. So you can imagine, in aging, more dense, climate-afflicted cities, just keeping buildings in a good state of repair is something that is going to become more costly and more difficult, and these are the technologies that could help us achieve that. In Amsterdam, this is an effort to use AI to connect green roofs and water management. And so what we have here is two algorithms at work. One's looking at the sky, figuring out when the rain's coming down, and then the other is looking at the runoff, the sewer system, the stormwater system, and essentially saying, okay, I have to retain this much water on this roof during this storm, and then release it later to make sure that we don't overflow the water treatment system on the other side. And this essentially changes this into a utility that is managing runoff and discharge. It looks like microgrids managed by machine learning. So this is a battery swap station in Taiwan for e-bikes. And this is not only a way to get battery charging out of buildings, residential buildings where it causes fires, but to push it down into community hubs. And we can think about designing more compact, car-free, resilient neighborhoods around it. So I'm almost done here. The question mark, the exclamation point for this one is about the new vulnerabilities these systems could create. And how do we create the consensus that we need to put strong fail-safes on this heavy urban automation and not have it something that actually generates more risk? I think the first step to really confronting some of these big questions around AI in the urban realm, particularly with respect to climate action, are making it transparent. This is a picture of a project called Digital Transparency in the Public Realm, which actually grew out of the Sidewalk Labs Toronto project. And what it is a visual language for trying to make visible to people the kinds of sensing that is happening in the urban realm and what it's being used for. And this is not to excuse it, it's really just to make people aware of it. And this is actually a framework that is evolving now. It's trying to confront the problem. They're trying to develop a language for understanding the algorithmic processes that are at work, the sense-making processes that are at work. So again, in terms of humility, I originally thought I would try to convince you, really just want to open your mind to the possibility that the future of climate adaptation is intelligence. It's artificial intelligence, it's human intelligence, it's natural intelligence working together. I want to invite you to also to explore, contribute to this horizon scan. There's a form where you can submit your own signals. And I just want to leave you with this thought that I think that this is the existential challenge of our civilization. We have to prepare our cities for what are sort of daily worsening forecasts of the changes ahead. There are other reasons why we may not have the resources to do that. We're aging, we're depleting resources there. There's a lot of headwinds, and I think we need tools to amplify our power. And I think this is such a great challenge that it's going to actually force us to, it's going to shape the construction, the social construction of this technology going forward. And, when I think about that, I think about the fear, the hype, the excitement, the trepidation about the size of AI models. This has really been the race to scale is what's been driving this all forward over the last 2 years. And there are some interesting counter narratives emerging. This is a map of the neural network of a fruit fly that was published by some researchers last year at Berkeley. And this doesn't have 70 billion parameters, 70 billion neurons. It has 140,000 neurons. It is a really, really small neural network. Yet it does amazing, useful things. It helps this organism navigate, operate, sustain itself, reproduce. And when you think about the challenges of climate adaptation, it is small, localized, detailed work. And so when I imagine the urban AI of the future, to me, maybe there is a future that leads more to these kinds of very small, very practical, very focused models that use less energy than the ones that we're building in Silicon Valley now. And maybe we want to start to incentivize and steer things in that direction. So thank you very much for listening. Appreciate time and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Anthony, for that talk. Provocative as usual, and I want to just focus in on what I felt like was a bit of your talk, and then you kind of went by it, which was the provocation or the question in one of your sections where you asked about kind of community participation in this work, and I guess as I was listening to you talk, and a lot of the examples that you used didn't really involve the participation of those who are maybe most impacted by these things and the development of the tools. And I'm just wondering what the consequences of that are. So how far can this go without community input before it completely bypasses the local knowledge that you talk about as being really important as this urban intelligence that we're hoping to build?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a central issue. There are, I think, a lot of competing tensions and viewpoints here. When I hear folks like Rit Agarwala talk about the urgency, there's a sense there that, and the kinds of things I talked about, like changing the environmental impact review process, automating pieces of the environmental impact review process. Even people who I think believe that that is a tool for maximum community participation in urban planning understand that big pieces of it are broken. They need to be updated. They're out of date. They don't achieve the goals that they were originally designed to achieve. I think that's all. There's a consensus that those things need to be reformed, but the risk is that the urgency, the expedience, powered by new tools on the kind of institutional side, will like that balance will be upset, and we won't have the folks who are interested in participation, who are interested in deliberation, will kind of get left behind during that reshuffling. And I think like that's a very specific example of where I think like that dynamic could play out in a really bad way, and be really disempowering. And that will crop up in many different circumstances. On the other hand, like I think that the excitement around and the door of possibility that has opened around some of these tools for really empowering lay people to analyze, to visualize their visions that reflect their values and their priorities in ways that allow them to compete with the glossy renderings, that institutions that want to transform the city have been able to do for a long time. Like, I think that's real. What the challenges are to like actually seizing that power, I think, remain to be determined. Is it access to tools? Is it the data that goes into the generation? Is it some other kind of social structure that would allow people to like pounce and act on those memes that are going to be created with those tools? But I think, yeah, it's a power struggle. It's sort of multiple different power struggles waiting to be played out.
Hi, my name is Enrico Bertini, and I am a faculty here at Northeastern between Curie and CAMD. Thanks for this talk. I have a general comment and then a specific question. I really liked, I was not aware of all these applications of AI to anything urban, and I find it really fascinating. And I think it's important. I think it's important to be to find a balance between being overly optimistic and also cautious. But every day I'm just blown away by what is possible to do, and the fact that now with AI it's possible to do all of the things that you presented makes me really, really optimistic. And this doesn't mean that there will not be new problems, but we almost adapt to the idea that these things can do these things too quickly, right? But if you pause for a moment, it's like, wow, that's crazy and amazing in a way. But my specific question is comes from my expertise. I work in data visualization and analytics, and some of the projects that you mentioned, like the GIS one and some other ones, are basically data analytics tools to help extract information out of complex data and hopefully produce knowledge that is going to lead you to useful actions. The biggest problem I see there is, how do we know that whatever is produced is quote unquote correct? This seems like a huge issue. And do you imagine that in the future, these tools are just going to be so good that at some point, I see two directions: so good that at some point we just trust them, or we will need to have tools to verify whatever they produce. Sorry, I went a little.
No, it's a great point. I think they're black boxes at this point. Like everyone in this room has had experience with LLMs, spitting back very convincing sounding nonsense, right? There's a lot, I think, that's happening technologically. What I have found to be most, not reassuring, but sort of showing the path towards solving these kinds of problems is what's going on with the chain of thought kind of work in AI right now. So the latest batch of models that are hitting the street are not models that do what's called zero-shot responding, where it's basically they get the prompt, they formulate their sort of answer, and then they just spit it back at you. But they're actually going through chains of breaking down queries into different tasks that they can do, and then executing those tasks, and then sort of working through a procedure, which can be visible to the user. So you can see how they reason through, really how they deconstruct a task into smaller tasks. Which I think opens the door to better evaluation, better fact checking. There's all kinds of things that you can do with prompt engineering to, I will often ask an AI to evaluate its own answer, multiple metrics, score itself on different things. And you learn a lot about what is coming back at you. And I think it's a huge liability for the industry, and there's so much effort going into addressing it. And if we had been talking about this last year, people would still be talking about hallucinations. And that's a problem that has largely been solved by the industry in the last year. The kinds of errors, that face plants that AI LLMs were making a year ago are mostly gone. And it's because it was a solvable engineering problem. And so, yeah, I think it's a wild card as to whether we get to AGI and these things become super intelligent and everyone inherently trusts them more than they trust human experts. But I think there's a lot of steps between here and there that will be really broadly valuable for complex decision making. And then the bigger set of stuff is we know a lot about decision support systems. There's a lot of science about how these things have been used effectively in complex decision making, and we shouldn't forget that. If anything, that field should expand, and I think it will, and particularly in the public sector, where you have a lot of vulnerable people, and high stakes decision making to be made.
We have time for one more. Mimi.
Hi, thanks for a great talk. I'm Mimi Scheller from Worcester Polytechnic Institute. You got to the section on what new vulnerabilities are we creating? And you mentioned making it transparent, but I just wanted to ask about some other aspects of vulnerabilities because I work with the Caribbean Climate Adaptation Network, which is a NOAA CAP program in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. And as soon as climate disasters happen in Puerto Rico, the first thing is the power grid goes out and there's no electricity. And so the more that we're depending on these systems and these data sets and these dashboards and things like that, if power grids go out, then what's the analog backup system? And what we find in Puerto Rico is actually like social infrastructure and people doing things in their communities together, building trust, building relationships is what actually matters in these climate scenarios.
I 100%. Although I would argue that it's still useful to have like satellite photos of, what's going on in that region after this. Like, there is a role, I think, for these systems. And the point I was trying to raise was like, do you want to be in a world 10 years from now where a hurricane hits in the Caribbean and the regional data center goes offline and therefore there is no access to data or AI? Or in a world where the AI is more like that fruit fly kind of scale, like it's something that lives in a laptop or a phone or a local Wi-Fi router or a solar-powered resilience center down the street that's being built for the reasons that you described to be the hub of a social network post-disaster. That's kind of, I think, the technological future that I'm saying we really need to take seriously. Is that something that's more distributed, more decentralized, more linked up into the other kinds of resilient infrastructure, and it provides enough intelligence. It doesn't have to provide all of the intelligence. And I think, I think there's a good enough base of knowledge that like having working mobile phone networks like after a disaster is supportive of the kind of resilience that you're describing. And I think there is an AI equivalent of that.
Great. Thank you so much.